I never imagined that a single sentence could quietly erase a lifetime. When my son smiled at me across the kitchen table and said, "You'll love the new nursing home," his voice was calm, reassuring, almost proud. He spoke as if he were talking about a vacation spot or a well-earned reward. I remember nodding slowly, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had already gone cold. At my age, you learn not to argue too quickly. You listen first, you observe, you swallow questions that taste bitter. I was in my late 60s then, still able to walk on my own, still cooking my own meals, still waking up every morning and watering the small plants by the window. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't lost. I was simply old enough to be inconvenient. For years I had lived in my son's house, quietly, carefully, trying to take up as little space as possible. I folded my blankets neatly every morning. I washed my cup after using it. I kept my opinions to myself. I told myself that love meant adjusting, that mothers were meant to bend. After all, I had raised him alone. I had skipped meals so he could eat well. I had worn the same shoes for years so he could have new ones for school. I reminded myself of all that whenever I felt invisible. Still, something changed after he got married. The house felt tighter, like the walls were slowly leaning in on me. Conversations would stop when I entered a room. Decisions were made without asking me. My presence became something to manage, not to cherish. I noticed the sighs, the exchanged looks, the way my slowness irritated them. I noticed how often I was told to rest or not worry whenever I tried to help. So when he mentioned the nursing home, I wasn't shocked, just tired. He told me it was beautiful. Clean rooms, friendly staff, people my age. "You won't be alone anymore," he said, as if loneliness had suddenly become my biggest problem. He said it was for my comfort, for my safety. He said it was temporary, just until things settled down. I asked no questions, not because I trusted him completely, but because I already knew the answers. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of the house. Laughter from the living room. Plates clinking. Life continuing, smoothly, without me at the center of it. I remembered how this same house once echoed with my voice, my instructions, my worries. Now it felt like a place I was borrowing. The next morning, everything moved quickly. Too quickly. My bag was already packed. Clothes I didn't remember choosing, a pair of slippers placed on top like an afterthought. He avoided my eyes while loading the bag into the car. I sat in the back seat, watching familiar streets pass by, each turn feeling final. I expected the nursing home to be sad. What I didn't expect was how clearly I would see the truth the moment we arrived. The building was clean, yes, quiet, yes, but it smelled like endings, like lives reduced to schedules and medications. Old faces stared back at me from wheelchairs and benches, their eyes full of stories no one had time to hear. I suddenly understood something my son never said out loud. This wasn't about my care. It was about convenience. He spoke to the staff, signed papers, handed over my bag. He hugged me quickly, awkwardly, as if staying too long might make him late for something more important. He said he'd visit. He said I'd adjust. I watched him walk away without looking back. That was the moment something inside me went very quiet. In my room, I sat on the narrow bed and looked around. A bed, a chair, a window. Nothing that belonged to me except my thoughts. For the first time in years, no one needed anything from me. No one was annoyed by my presence. No one expected me to shrink further. And in that silence, I realized something painful and powerful at the same time. If I stayed, I would slowly disappear anyway. Not dramatically, not all at once, just piece by piece, until I became another quiet figure by the window, waiting for visits that might never come. So I made a decision, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. That evening, as the lights dimmed and the halls grew quiet, I held my bag again. I thought of all the years I had endured for the sake of family, all the times I had stayed silent to keep peace. And I understood finally that peace without dignity is just another kind of prison. The next day I disappeared, not because I was lost, but because I chose not to be found. The morning after I disappeared did not begin with fear. It began with a strange calm I hadn't felt in years. I woke up in a small rented room miles away from the nursing home, sunlight slipping through thin curtains, dust floating in the air like quiet witnesses. For the first time in decades, I had woken up somewhere that no one had chosen for me. That alone felt like freedom. I had left the nursing home before dawn. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a short note folded carefully on the empty bed. I need to live what's left of my life on my own terms. I didn't blame anyone in those words. I didn't accuse. I simply reclaimed myself. Walking out of that building, My heart pounded like I was doing something forbidden. At my age, independence is treated like rebellion. People expect gratitude for confinement, silence for survival. But with every step away from that place, my spine felt straighter, my breath deeper. I took a bus to a town where no one knew my name. The driver didn't ask questions. He just took my fare and nodded. I pressed my forehead against the window and watched the world move forward, realizing how long I had been standing still. The room I rented was modest. A bed, a table, a kettle, a bathroom with a leaky faucet. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't comfort. But it was mine. I unpacked slowly, placing my clothes in a single drawer, my slippers beside the bed. I boiled water and made tea, the familiar sound grounding me. That simple routine, something I had done for others my entire life, now belonged only to me. As the days passed, I learned how invisible an older woman can be and how powerful that invisibility is. No one asked where I came from. No one told me where I should be. I walked to a nearby park in the afternoons and sat on a bench, watching children play, couples argue softly, strangers live their lives without noticing me. I found peace in being unseen. But at night, the memories came. I remembered my son as a child, holding my hand too tightly when crossing the street. I remembered his laughter, his fears, the way he used to sleep beside me during storms. I didn't stop loving him just because he had failed me. Love doesn't turn off that easily. But something else had changed. I no longer needed his approval to exist. I wondered when he would notice I was gone. When the nursing home would call. When questions would finally replace assumptions. Part of me expected panic. Another part expected relief. I suspected the truth would be somewhere in between. On the 4th day, I bought a small notebook. I began to write. Not letters, not apologies, but memories. My life in my own voice. The sacrifices I had made. The dreams I had buried. The strength I had never been thanked for. Each page felt like breathing out after years of holding my breath. I also wrote about the fear. The fear of getting sick alone. The fear of dying unnoticed. I didn't deny those realities, but I realized something important. Those fears existed even when I lived with family. Loneliness doesn't disappear just because people are around. Sometimes it grows louder. I learned to cook simple meals for myself. Soup, rice, tea with too much sugar. I listened to the radio. I spoke to the woman who owned the building, a widow herself, who nodded when I said I needed quiet more than company. She didn't ask why I was alone. She understood without words. One afternoon, as I sat by the window, I imagined my son walking into the nursing home room and finding my bed empty. I imagined the confusion, the irritation, the sudden inconvenience of my absence. I wondered if guilt would follow, or if anger would arrive first. But then I stopped imagining, because my story was no longer happening in his house, or his decisions or his plans. It was happening here, in this small room, in my steady breathing, in my choice to remain. I had not vanished because I was weak. I had vanished because I finally understood my worth. And once you learn that, going back becomes impossible. I stayed hidden longer than I expected. Weeks passed, then months, and the world did not collapse because I was no longer where others had placed me. Instead, something unexpected happened. I began to live. At first, every knock on the door made my heart jump. I imagined familiar voices, accusations, demands disguised as concern. But the knocks were never for me. They were for someone else. Slowly, the fear loosened its grip. I settled into a quiet rhythm. Mornings began with tea and the sound of birds outside the window. Afternoons were spent walking slowly through nearby streets, learning the shape of this new place, greeting shopkeepers who came to recognize me not as someone's mother, but simply as myself. Evenings were for writing. Page after page, I poured out the truth I had swallowed for years. One afternoon, a letter arrived. The envelope carried a handwriting I knew too well. My hands trembled as I held it, not from hope, but from clarity. I opened it carefully. The words inside were messy, confused, a mixture of worry, frustration, and something that might have been regret. He wrote about the nursing home calling, about panic, about how I should have said something. He wrote that he didn't understand why I had done this. He asked where I was. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in my drawer. I did not reply. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because for the first time, my silence belonged to me. I understood then that disappearing had given me something I had never been allowed before: control over my own narrative. For years, my story had been told through sacrifice, obedience, and patience. Now it was being written through choice. There were difficult days. Days when my body ached more than usual. Days when I missed the sound of family, even flawed family. Days when loneliness sat beside me like an old friend. But those days passed, just like the good ones. And through all of them, I remained. I began volunteering at a small community center, helping children with reading. They didn't see me as old or inconvenient. They saw me as someone who listened, someone who stayed. Their laughter filled spaces in me I thought were gone forever. One evening, as I walked home under fading sunlight, I realized something that made me stop in the middle of the street. I was no longer waiting for anything. Not forgiveness. Not permission. Not rescue. I had already saved myself. People talk about disappearing, as if it means being erased, but I wasn't. Erased. I was revealed. To myself, most of all. Had spent a lifetime being useful. Now I was simply alive. I don't know what my son tells people. I don't know if he still searches. Maybe one day I will leave a trace. Maybe I won't. What matters is that when I look in the mirror now, I see a woman who chose dignity over comfort, truth over convenience. I did not vanish because I was abandoned. I vanished because I refused to abandon myself any longer. And in that disappearance, I finally came home.